Today, as we study social perception, we'll go from the elements that capture our attention as we perceive people to building impressions of what they're like, to making sense of our social scene. And what are these elements that most frequently capture our attention? We can look at a host of them, but we're going to be concentrating today on the nonverbal ones, the major visual cues that we use, the face cues that we use, voice cues, and movement cues. All of these that combine to help us make judgments about people, to form that picture in our head, if you will. Let's start with the major visual ones, and then we'll move on to the face. When we scan a room, the first way we divide people in a room, males and females. So we're forming impressions immediately on the basis of gender or sex. And once we make that division, once we make that categorization, and these categories are going to tell us something about the people, shorthands to how they're going to behave, then the next categorization that we're going to make will probably be either in terms of age or race, ethnicity. Again, going back to our experience, our categories to give us some expectations about how people are going to behave and what we should be looking for in their behavior. And after that, another major visual, how people are dressed. And again, impressions that are formed from the way that people dress. So we've got these, start with major visual cues that give us information that help us form perceptions. That, if we go back to what we talked about a previous time, that give us some set in terms of what we're going to be seeing from this particular individual's behavior. Once we get beyond those major categorizations, we start to look at the individual. And then we move into a whole host of nonverbal cues, things that we use about making judgments about a person even before that person begins to speak. The face, the wonderful, mobile, informative face. What do we tell from looking at a person's face? And what do we communicate with our own faces? Frequently, we don't have a chance to use verbal information. The situation somehow doesn't permit it. And so we flash information using facial expressions. And we're going to take a look at some of those facial expressions in just a minute. We flash our emotions. We flash puzzled looks. Go over that again, please. I can't raise my hand, but boy, am I lost. And other people are supposed to understand these facial expressions that we're flashing. Sometimes we are giving these expressions quite purposefully. It's under our control. We want people to know what we're feeling. And other times, it's not under our control, and we wish we could cover it, and we're trying to hide it, but there may be micro flashes of emotions that we're feeling, and we just can't cover it up because it's so powerful. You're in a situation where you can't express how enraged you are. You're talking to your boss. But boy, is something making you angry. Your voice tries to control it. Your rest of your body behavior tries to control it, but there may be something about your face that's telegraphing, I'm not a happy camper right at this time. So, facial expressions, emotional cues. What can you tell? About these faces? Can you tell which face expresses disgust. In that grouping, if you had to pick disgust out of one of the 6, top row or bottom row? Bottom row, okay? Left, right, or center? Center, okay? No question. How is it that we're able to recognize it? Uniformly. Nobody here had any question about it. Let's try another one. Suppose we're looking for anger now. We've got disgust out of the way, so it makes it a little easier. Top or bottom row? Top, left, right, or center? Center. In unison, center. We know anger when we see it, and we know disgust when we see it. And if I were to ask you to make an angry face, or make a face that reflects disgust, you do something relatively similar to what we see up on the screen. Let's go one more time. Happiness. Top or bottom? Top. Okay, and? Okay, the first one. It would be, from a viewer's perspective, the one on the left. Okay, happiness is really easy to understand. Well, what have we got left here? How about fear?
Bottom.
Bottom?
Bottom right.
Bottom right. The fearful face. That leaves sadness. Top. Top right. Okay, and the last one, surprise. Okay, and now we've eliminated them so we can see what all of them are. What we've got here are a series of photographs that were developed by a researcher named Ekman, as he studied emotional expressions around the world. And what he found is that there seemed to be 6 basic emotional expressions that we have, could well be hardwired in, because these expressions can be recognized, whether they're shown to someone here in the US, in New Jersey, in Newark, or whether they're shown to someone off in Borneo, or someone off in Malaysia. Wherever we go, Western Europe, they're recognized around the world. And we can similarly do the same, recognize expressions from people from other cultures when we're working with these 6 basic expressions. So we're able to flash emotions to people, and it has good value to us because it's important for other people to know how we're feeling so they can respond appropriately to our behavior. But we find some interesting variations between men and women. No surprise here. Some research that I engaged in with my husband, working with just the negative emotions, we didn't deal with surprise and we didn't deal with happiness, because happiness is so easy to recognize. Almost no one makes a mistake. A smile is a smile is a smile is a smile the world around. And surprise, that wide open look to the face, again, we put aside. We're really interested in the negative emotions. What can we tell when people flash us negative emotions? In part because we're socialized not to express negative emotions, for the most part. You know, in a large social situation, you have to hang on to these feelings more to yourself, unless there's a situation that particularly allows you to express it. I mean, in a work situation, we would be somewhat concerned if we saw somebody frequently crying as a response. We'd think perhaps not a mature response, or perhaps this person is somehow clinically depressed. Either way, it wouldn't appear to be a normal response. And we'd have trouble with a person who was angry all the time and hostile. So we're supposed to keep on this even emotional keel. What do we find out? That largely, women are better at expressing emotions than men. No big surprise. We allow women to be more emotional mostly than men. We probably encourage women, reward women for expressing emotions more than we reward men for expressing emotions. except for one emotion, which I now call the anomalous, the different emotion. Anybody want to guess what this emotion might be where men express it better than women? Anger. Exactly right. Men are much better at expressing anger than women. Is it something that's nature, or is it something that's nurture, or is it a combination of both? You could argue either way. And we have no solid answer in all of this, except to say that men do a better job of making angry faces than women do. Consequences of this in any social situation. Women who think that they are flashing angry faces may be misread, especially by men, because men do a particularly lousy job of reading women's expressions of anger. Must confuse them. Or maybe it's the old phrase, gee, you're cute when you're angry. Or maybe we're using other cues for when women are angry. They're better at using voice channels than face channels. But it can present some perhaps confusing social situations. And we add to this the fact that women especially want men to know when they're angry. It's important for them to know when they're angry. So, variations in emotional expressions. Besides emotions, what else can we read off faces? What are the frequent things that we look for when we judge a face? Well, another frequent element is something we call attractiveness. Common consensus on attractiveness, that's all. We sort of know attractive when we see it. We agree that someone is attractive or not attractive. But there too, interesting consequences in terms of impressions and behavior. We like attractive faces, generally speaking. And we often think that people who are attractive are more competent. Really interesting piece of research on attractiveness and success done by a researcher at New York University, Madeline Heilman. She used pictures of men and women and attached them to a made-up resume of the person, and then asked her class to make certain judgments about why the people were successful. She used pictures, if we do this, of people who were judged to be more attractive, men and women. Okay, and also of those who were less attractive. Men and women. And then she asked for judgments about the reasons for this success. Was it personal? In other words, was it due to ability? Or was it situational, due to some external factor? The finding, interestingly, we try to understand going from attractiveness to understanding underlying behavior, is that the more attractive men and the less attractive women were both judged to be successful for internal or personal reasons, more on ability. And the attractive women and less attractive men were judged to be successful more for external factors. I see puzzled looks on some faces. How do we get to this? Well, let's think. Attractiveness works to the favor of men. However we judge men to be attractive, whatever we think about goes into making attractiveness of men. And I'm going to tie this up to yet another piece of research. Okay? And it works to the detriment of women. Somehow, we look at a woman who's really attractive in this situation, and according to this piece of research, we're saying, didn't get there on her ability, got there on her looks. Okay, we look at a man who is less attractive, and we look at him and say, gee, how did he get there? Must have been somebody who helped him. And somehow we judge this person to have less ability. Now we need to tie this into yet another piece of research that has been done, or a whole series of studies that have been done, looking at judgments between age and other characteristics of a person. And what do we find here? Well, generally people who are judged to be younger are judged to be more attractive. But there are a few variations on this. We find overall it's much stronger for women. Women who have baby faces are judged to be more attractive. Well, what goes along with being younger? Well, maybe less experienced. So maybe we're looking at something here of attractive women, baby faces, less experience, less on ability, more on other factors, okay, other people helping this woman along. What about men? Sort of a convoluted path that we're going here. Men's attractiveness was not so clear-cut the baby face. There was something more about maturity in men that made them attractive. Mature men looking attractive. And what do we then attach to maturity? Maybe things like ability and experience. And we begin to tie some of these things up, and we begin to look at the complications that go along with attractiveness. So we read things into people in a convoluted way, just on how we judge their attractiveness. And it has consequences. It has consequences for who's ever going to be a manager, and has consequences certainly for the person in a situation. So attractiveness is something. We also judge trustworthiness when we look at a face. This is a toughie. Important for us because we need to be able to trust individuals in everyday interactions. And surely as a manager, you're going to want to be able to trust your employees. How do we judge something called trustworthiness off faces? And yet we do it all the time. I'm not saying we're accurate in our judgments. In any of these things in social perception, accuracy is a different issue from the impressions that we get. You know an honest face when you run across it? Do you know a dishonest face? What cues would we look for in the dishonest face, the face that we're less likely to trust? Would we focus on the eyes? Would we focus on the mouth? Anybody have any guesses? Eyes. We see, and eyes do count. But again, some research I engaged in, again, my husband George Rotter tells us that the mouth, which is even more movable, becomes more important. It's a combination of both. It's eyes and mouth. I know we have a phrase out there where we talk about the shifty-eyed individual. We always think the person we can't trust is the person we can't look straight in the eye. Okay, or can't look us straight in the eye. On the other hand, the best con artist out there is going to give us the warmest handshake and is going to engage our gaze longer than anybody else. And we'll be fooled. And that's why we call them con artists, because they work, they do con us. But it's important because we continue to make these interpretations. How do we use the mouth in gauging trustworthiness? It's that old smile. From the time we are really young, we learn to trust people who smile at us. The smile. It's a sense of approval. Somebody's not going to yell at us. We can be open to the smiling person. We can be more relaxed around the smiling person. Smiling person does not put us on the defensive. And as long as we're not talking about a grin, a forced grin, but we're talking about the natural smile that leads us to trust individuals. Politicians, by the way, if they don't have good natural smiles, should work with a smiling coach, I suppose, or a dramatic coach to help them become relaxed in terms of smiling. And eye gaze also counts. We're looking for an eye gaze that's straight ahead, especially for men. Okay, for women, our research told us a little bit off to the side, a little bit. Perhaps the woman who gazes very forcefully in a social situation is maybe interpreted as being something else, maybe coming on too strong, too dominant in the social situation. So we're more likely to see the one who is perhaps fulfilling the expected social role of being a little less dominant, eyes off a little bit, but not way off to the side. As we come into the election season, and you see photos flashed up on the TV of opponents, look at those faces and see if they've captured the expression of their opponent that makes the opponent look as if you wouldn't buy the proverbial used car from this person. They're going to look probably to flash up expressions which would lead us to have misgivings about the individual in terms of trustworthiness. But important. I mean, you can think of a lot of careers where you need to read trustworthiness of people on a very regular basis. If you're in hiring, you need to be able to do it. If you're going to be a policeman, you better be able to do it because you're going to be taking testimony all the time. Now, what I'm talking about doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to make accurate judgments. Accuracy left out of this. We're probably better able to judge accuracy from other nonverbal cues and not the face if we're dealing with accuracy. And we'll go into those cues. As a matter of fact, we will go into those cues right now as we take a look at various voice cues. Listening to a person's voice. What can you read off a person's voice in terms of characteristics of that person? First,
Enthusiasm?
Sure, enthusiasm, but if we go back to our major things, the first split that we're usually going to make when we hear just the voice, male-female. You can tell if the voice is a male or a female, usually. Sometimes, indeed, we get confused, but that's clear. We can often tell within what very wide categories something about a person's age. There's something that happens to the quality of voice as people get older that indicates, signals to us that this is an older person. And we also usually know a very young person. Occasionally, we get confused on the telephone, and we attribute an older person's voice to a younger person. The phone call you've made where you thought you were talking to the child and you're talking to the parent. A little embarrassing. We get over those kinds of things, so we do make mistakes. Age. And then there are a whole range of emotions that we can read. We can tell from listening to a person's voice. We've heard enthusiasm. And the enthusiastic voice has a different quality to it than the depressed voice. If someone is depressed, chances are they'll speak a lot slower, and there'll be a certain flatness to the voice. The enthusiastic or the excited person starts to talk a lot more rapidly, And the voice may even go up. And so you know the difference. Generally speaking, those voices that we judge to be more attractive are going to speak somewhat more rapidly than those that are very slow. As a matter of fact, if I slow the pace of my talking, I'll make you very annoyed. We don't like that. We like things to come at a somewhat more rapid pace, not too rapid. So we have then emotions which we can tell from voices. Sometimes we can tell the health of a person. We know the quality of their voice when they're healthy. If they've got, sort of a raspy laryngitis, we know that. Or there may be something else that signals that they're not up to snuff. It's not as strong a voice. Sometimes people have weak voices. And so something else that we're able to tell about people. And then, of course, all those regional accents that people have. We all speak normally. It's other people who have accents. We don't have accents. We don't hear our own accents. So something else that we tell. And from the quality of voice and how people present themselves, and whether they use a lot of vocalics. What are these things called vocalics? You see, in terms of talking. We may even begin to read off certain traits like intelligence. So lots of judgments that we make just listening to a person and the quality of the person's voice. And beyond voice, we have yet another set of cues that we use. Movement cues. When we're looking at movement, we're judging things such as a person's gait. So if we're looking at somebody walking, does it matter whether somebody's walking like this or like this? Indeed, it makes a difference. And we judge, what do we judge off a person's gait? Think about it. If somebody's depressed, we expect them to walk along in a slumped way. If they're excited, they might be walking hurriedly.
What social status?
A certain dominance and regalness. Do we expect Prince Charles to walk differently than the commoners? In terms of, yeah.
Confidence? Can you tell?
Confidence, certainly confidence. Absolutely confidence is something that we're able to judge in terms of a walk. And I want to pick up on confidence. And another piece of research done a number of years ago by somebody who knew ballet and social psychology altogether. There is a way in ballet of coding movements that's used so that you can teach people ballet. And this system for coding movements was used to watch people walking in Manhattan. And they coded the way people walked. They then showed variations in people walking to people who were known to have engaged in mugging. Okay? So here we've got, I guess it was carried out at one of the prisons. They showed them and they said, okay, look at these. Which is the one that you'd more likely attack? Is there something in a walk that tells you that this is going to be an easier victim than another person? And the answer was absolutely. And there was a similarity in what they picked out. It partly had to do with confidence, and it partly had to do with, strangely enough, something called Lateral movement or contralateral movement, something we never ever think about when we're walking. But most of us walk, I hope I get this right on camera, okay, are using contralateral movement, in other words, opposite hand and foot, okay? That's typical. For some reason, these prisoners who had histories of mugging picked out their likely mugging victims as people who were not using contralateral movement, okay, but were going like this. And I don't know what that signals to a person, but it signals something different in behavior. Okay, now when you go out of here and you start to walk, you're going to look at your hands and feet, and then you're going to have trouble walking, trying to decide whether you're using lateral or contralateral movement. Okay. But we signal a number of things. So gait says something in terms of movement. Posture says something. We can have that puzzled look. That look, I'm puzzled. Okay? You can have the attentive look in posture, body forward. You can have the bored look. We signal these things with posture. A number of things that we're reading out in terms of how people position themselves. And then finally, in terms of movement cues, among other things, we look at things such as touching in personal space. How close can we get to somebody before both of us start to feel uncomfortable? What do we know? We know certainly when it comes to things in personal space that status counts, that people who are of higher status have more space around them than people who are of lower status. So people who are of higher status can approach us, but we can't so easily approach people of higher status. And we know that it varies by cultures. That, for instance, the people who come from Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, Far Eastern cultures are able to tolerate getting closer to people than those who come from Northern European cultures. More space needed. Don't get too close. That children can get close to anybody. That women can get closer to each other and closer to men than men can get to men, except, of course, when they're playing football. And then it's okay. This is a little, like trivial but interesting example of women getting closer to each other and nobody flicking an eyelash about it. If circumstances required it, for two women to share a bed on a business trip or something like that, but people wouldn't think much about it. But two men to share a bed? We'd have second thoughts, We just don't allow these kinds of things. So that we're using then, we've looked at a whole host. We've gone from the face to the voice to the way we move as a way of forming impressions about people. But the person themselves is not the only thing that contributes to what's going on. What else contributes? Well, the situation, and from the situation, the various schemas that we build. How does the social situation feed into it? Well, in the same way we made judgments about objects based on background cues, we make judgments about people based on background cues as well. And certain features of people will become salient based on what the background is. An example, a picture of a woman among a group of men. In that case, the male-female category becomes very salient. Or, if we reverse it, the picture of a man pushing a baby carriage in a park. Not something that we're used to. It stands out from all the women pushing baby carriages. And so male becomes then an important category. So we're looking at what people are doing in relation to what other people are doing. One person jumping up and down catches our attention, and we look at the one person jumping up and down. We say, what's that person jumping up and down for? But if you've got a bunch of people at a rally in a football stadium all jumping up and down, we make some different judgment about the person. And the jumping up and down doesn't become a particularly salient or important cue or something that we focus on. So the situation provides information for us in terms of the judgments and the perceptions we make and the categories we're going to use. And we take all of these pieces of information and they become packets for us, schemas, mental maps, blueprints for how familiar people, familiar events, and familiar objects work. We have schemas in our heads for lots of different things. We see in a business situation two men in suits talking. We can't hear what they're saying, but our schemas will guide us as to what they're talking about, even without hearing what they're saying. Our schemas would probably tell us that they're talking about some business issue and not the relative use of Pampers versus some other item, disposable diaper, for the babies. Same situation. Two women talking, business situation. Our schemas, our past history, our expectations of women being more social, more relation-oriented, going to tell us that they're not going to be talking about the latest financial spreadsheet that came out, and that they're either talking about people or they're talking about something personal. Our schemas in the situation. So our schemas guide us along things, and they're going to have us pick up on certain things. And ultimately, where we go next week is we're going to see where our schemas, these mental maps, these blueprints that we have, these packets of information, while often leading us to make correct judgments, can lead us also to make incorrect judgments. We have schemas for how professors behave. And if professors behave somehow in opposition, in contradiction to this, throws our schema off. We don't know whether we now need to incorporate more information into this and say, this is how professors behave, or we need to make a judgment and say, this person is very peculiar for a professor. And I come into a situation with schemas, too, about how students should behave. And usually my expectations are fulfilled. It's rare that they haven't been fulfilled. As a matter of fact, I remember the one instance when it was violated. Years ago, in a graduate class, when a student got so excited and so angry that the entire class got quiet. And we weren't sure what we were going to have to do. I didn't know whether I was going to have to counsel the student out of the classroom. But fortunately, the student got in control of himself. Okay, and I probably didn't surprise anybody when I said himself in this situation, because we already said before that men are better at expressing anger than women. And so it stays with me, because I don't expect students to behave that way. We remember, we focus on when people behave, shall we say, out of role, out of character, out of schema, and we're startled. So from all of this then, all of these elements, we have a way, we have a process of explaining causes of behavior. We call this process causal attribution. We are all amateur psychologists. We are all constantly going from elements of behavior to impressions about behavior to attributing causes of behavior. We make these jumps intuitively and naturally and quickly. Basically, we use two categories to attribute behavior. One is a personal attribution, attributing behavior to the internal characteristics of an individual. What might be some of these internal characteristics? Ability, personality. Well, it's all motivation, okay? But I think the quality that you're really looking for, or the trait, is effort. Mood. Okay, all internal qualities that we can look at. And the other grouping would be situational attributions, some external factor. And what are some examples of things that fit into external factors when we're trying to explain somebody's behavior? Got lucky. Task difficulty. Easy, difficult in terms of explaining it. Anybody could do that? Only, or it was so hard, nobody could do it. Other people. And so as we look at behavior, we're attributing it usually to one or another factor, depending on certain situational causes and depending on what we know about the individual. But it turns out that we do this in a somewhat systematic way. What we were looking at here, and actually there is a person by the name of Kelly who came up with this. It's Kelly's covariation theory that we're really looking at. Is that we use three categories for helping us make judgments about behavior. We use, that's not coming up too well. Okay, this will be better. The distinctiveness of behavior. And when we're judging distinctiveness of behavior, we're judging a person's behavior over different situations. If you're trying to judge the distinctiveness of my behavior, you'd have to judge me in my role as professor. You'd have to judge me in some other role, meeting me in the supermarket, seeing me drive a car, seeing me in different situations to get some gauge of distinctiveness, seeing people in varying situations and how they behave. If we're using consensus, then the basis is social comparison. If you're making a judgment about me, how do I behave relative to other professors you know? If I'm making a judgment about you, how do you behave relative to other students that I know? If we're making a judgment about a salesman, how does he behave relative to other salesmen that you know? And finally, when we judge consistency, we're talking about behavior over time. Same situation, different times. How consistent is the behavior? Are we seeing similar behavior, same situation over time? Or are we seeing something very unusual? Okay, now given all of those things, how do we go about making attributions? If behavior is highly distinctive, okay, we see this behavior in one particular situation, but we don't see that behavior in any other situation. I seem to be mild and docile when I'm in the classroom, and mild and docile when I'm in the supermarket, but I seem very aggressive when I'm in a car. Okay, then we would judge that there's something external that's causing it. There's something about being in the car that's making me behave that way. It's not the normal me. On the other hand, if my behavior is very non-distinctive, it's very typical in every situation. Every time you see me, I'm mild and docile. And you say, oh, it's part of her personality. She's the mild and docile person. Okay, no distinctiveness to the personality in varying situations. Internal attribute. Consensus, social comparison. If there is high consensus about behavior, a person is behaving the way everybody else in the situation is behaving, then we say the situation must have a strong bearing on how the person is behaving. We see, I don't know, after a football game, everybody running onto the field and tearing down the goalposts. Everybody's doing it. So we're not judging anybody there other than in the situation. We're not thinking that they're going berserk or something like that or running amok. They're behaving the way everybody else is. External the situation. Okay? However, if there is low consensus, only one person is doing it, we begin to think this is crazy. This is really unusual. And so we see it then as being internal. If everybody in the football stadium is wearing, I don't know, some kind of funny hat, then it's caused by the situation and it's external. But if only one person is wearing the hat with, I don't know, the buffalo horns on it or something like that, then we begin to think of this as one individual who's looking for attention, has strong needs for attention. It's the internal cause of behavior. And finally, we get to consistency over time. If people are highly consistent every time you see the same behavior, then we say it's internal. Every time you see me, I'm smiling. You can think I'm a fairly happy person. Okay? If it becomes inconsistent, if one time I come in, I'm smiling, I'm smiling, I'm smiling, I'm smiling, I'm looking depressed. You're not going to judge me to be a depressed person. You're going to say, what happened? You're going to look for a situational reason for the behavior. So then what we're constantly doing is, in terms of trying to make some kind of sense out of every situation, at some level we're going through all these judgments. We're doing it rapidly, we're doing it unconsciously, we're doing it intuitively. But these are the things that we're relying on to helping us make sense of what's happening to people. Let's try a few examples in terms of making sense. Okay? Suppose we have a person who's raving about a movie. One of your friends just saw, I don't even know what's out there now, I haven't looked at the newspapers lately, some movie, and comes back and absolutely raves about the movie. Now we have to make a judgment. Is this really a good movie or not? How do we go about making the judgment? Well, we ask the question in terms of the person's behavior. Is this really distinctive? Does this person rave about every movie that she goes to? Or is this kind of unusual? Doesn't usually rave about movies. If we think that the person raves about every movie, then we're going to say, can't trust the person's judgment. Okay? On the other hand, if it's quite distinctive, then we're going to say, oh, maybe it's a good movie. Okay, so we're looking at it over other movies. Okay, consensus. What are other people saying about this movie? Okay? Other people don't like it. This person particularly likes this movie. Well, we think the person is going to like it for some internal reason, maybe, and maybe it's not the movie. Maybe something resonated in that person. Okay? Well, consistency would be, has this person seen the same movie time and again and liked it? Okay, but it helps us then make judgments about any situation. You're a manager and you're looking at one of your salespeople. And you see one of your salespeople treating a customer rudely. Now you've got to make a judgment. Is this a trait on the part of the person? Or is this something unusual in the situation? Well, how distinctive is the behavior? Have you seen this salesperson be rude to you? Not only rude to customers, but rude to you. And rude to other people. Distinctiveness of behavior. Behavior in different situations. Okay? If the behavior is highly distinctive, we've never seen this person be rude to other people before. We're going to say, maybe it's something about the situation. Okay? And maybe it's something about this specific customer that's driving this person to distraction, to rudeness. Or internal, if we've happened to appraise some rudeness in other situations. Comparison. Well, if we had a camera and we could see the customer going through the store, do other salespeople treat this customer rudely? If others do, then we're going to think, maybe it's something about the customer, not about the salespeople. There's something about this customer that evokes rude behavior or impatient behavior on the part of salespeople. And we could probably conjure up the image of what that type of customer may be like. Yeah? Okay, somebody who's picky, who keeps changing their minds about things, just making life really hard for the salesperson. On the other hand, if nobody is treating this customer rudely except our one salesperson under observation, I'm going to say, well, maybe it's something about this salesperson. Okay? There's going to be low consensus. And then finally, consistency over time. How has this salesperson behaved towards people over time, other customers? Again, if it's something that we've seen, then we'll judge it to be internal. And if it's unusual, we've never seen this before, we might say, bad day. Everybody has bad days. And they act off. And we look for something in the situation. I mean, maybe you drove to work and you were in horrendous traffic jams all the way in. That could raise your stress level, and by the time you get into work, you have patience for nobody. As an example. Or maybe you had some problems at home before you came in. And again, it reduces your capacity to deal with difficult situations on the job. As long as everything is easy, you might get through the day. But otherwise, you might not. So we look at all of these things to make judgments. Well, how accurate are our judgments? We do make errors. Two basic errors that we make are fundamental attribution error, the tendency to underestimate the impact of the situation on other people's behavior, and to overestimate the role of overestimate the role of personal causes. When we're judging other people, looking at people and we're making judgments and we're seeing their behavior and we're over-attributing it to those things that I said before, such as personality, ability, effort, mood. I walk out the door, I'm carrying a stack of books, I slip, books go all over. Okay? Everybody smiles and says, "What a klutz. What a clumsy person." Okay? Somebody drops a tray in the cafeteria, everybody claps and roars. And again, the same thing. Attribution to the person. Somebody makes a mistake on the job. How do we view that? They messed up. They really loused up. Weren't paying attention, weren't putting in enough effort. Maybe they don't have the ability to do the job. We're attributing it to the person. And we're missing the situation. I'll come back to that in a minute. The second basic error is actor-observer error. And in this case, we tend to attribute our own behavior to situational causes and others to personal causes. I trip. I was carrying too much. It was slippery. It was uneven pavement. Situation. I can see the cause of it. I can get a report in on time. Why not? Problems at home. The computer was down. Somebody didn't give me enough time to do it. It was an unrealistic expectation. Other people out there. My boss is likely to think, I didn't put enough effort into it. I was wasting my time doing other stuff. Personal attribution. What might account for these errors that we make? The tendency to over-attribute for other people to the person, miss the situation, and the tendency for ourselves to look at the situation. Obviously, we're not seeing ourselves the way other people see us. Maybe it's an old figure ground problem. When we look at a person against a background, that person is figure, and we concentrate on the person and miss the background. But we can't see ourselves. All we can see is the background. Maybe if we could see ourselves the way other people see us, we'd make the same judgments. And there's some research that actually suggests that that's the case. And so what we've done then today is we've gone from the elements, the things that capture our attention, particularly in terms of nonverbal, to building impressions that we have of people, judgments about attractiveness and ability, to looking at underlying causes of behavior. There are some consequences that we're going to need to think about, and we will pick up on some of the consequences next time, particularly from a manager's perspective. What does it mean to attribute too much to the person and not the situation? And so next time we pick up on going from these impressions to social reality. And we look at the effects of misjudgments, and we look at building self-fulfilling prophecies.